I've always
This is called Spirit of the Invisible.
how wonderful.
It alleged to promote an end that was no manipulation. It says there's a health warning on the not recommended for mercantilist, statists, and socialists. It's a great show.
That's lovely.
It's a lovely piece.
How nice. How nice.
In that case, I will give you a quick introduction and then.
Okay, I'll carry on. We'll do it.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Adam Smith Institute tonight. Thank you all very much for taking time out of your evenings to join us for what's sure to be riveting and excellent talk for anyone that has heard Deirdre speak either in person or on YouTube or online before. My name is Daniel Pryor. I am research here at the Adam Smith Institute. For those of you who might be your first time here, we are a free market think tank based right here in the heart of London, and we try to change public policy, public opinion through media, research, events, publishing, etc. And so tonight we're very pleased to welcome Professor Deirdre McCloskey, who will be speaking on the role of ideas and culture in explaining the Great Enrichment, the wonderful hockey stick-like swooping of growth starting in the early 19th century, and trying to contrast that, I think, with factors that often pointed to by economists, the role of institutions and material factors, and looking more at the idea side of things. Deirdre is a distinguished Professor Emerita of Economics and of History, and Professor Emerita of English and of Communication at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Trained at Harvard in the 60s as an economist. She has written 20 books and some 400 academic articles on everything from economic theory and history to philosophy, rhetoric, feminism, statistical theory, law, ethics, and more. She's also taught for 12 years at the University of Chicago in the economics department in its glory days, but now describes herself as a literary, quantitative, postmodern, free market, progressive Episcopalian, ex-Marxist, mid-Western woman from Boston who was once a man, not conservative, Christian, classical, liberal. And her most recent popular books, for example, are Why Liberalism Works and Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich with Mark Carney. But Deirdre, I will hand over to you for what will be a fascinating talk.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm here on a fast lecture tour around England, and I've been to Oxford and Cambridge and the LSE, but here's the high point. This is it. I have an argument that I've only slowly come to, which is that it's not the usual things that people say that caused what we often call the Industrial Revolution, but is more appropriately called the Great Enrichment. The classic period of the Industrial Revolution is 100 years after 1750. And in fact, what's peculiar about the modern world is that it kept going. Earlier efflorescences, Florence in the 15th century, China in the Song Dynasty, Rome under the good emperors, Athens in the 5th century, and so forth, did have economic success and increases in income per head of about the magnitude that happened in the classic period of the Industrial Revolution. An increase, it's been calculated, of about 60%. And that's nice. I'd be glad, I think everyone here would like to have an income 60% higher than the one they have now. But what then happened afterwards is that the economies that adopted liberal policies, and even some that didn't, continued to grow to the point at which income would double in a place like Britain or the United States every long generation, and then redouble, and then redouble, and then redouble again. Until now, the average person in Britain, who in 1800 was getting along, if you call it that, on about $6 a day in modern London prices. Imagine living in London on $6 a day. I must say I'm shocked in my visit here. A woman who is tired of London is tired of life. I come back here quite frequently. My first visit was 1959. Remember on Guy Fawkes night, we got a policeman's helmet and put it in the fountain. So I've been in London a long time, and I'm shocked by how many people are sleeping rough on the street. It's quite extraordinary. But I assert, contrary to that observation, that income has kept growing in Britain. Contrary again to what you often hear. People say, oh, see, income per capita in the United States stopped growing in 1973 or something crazy like that. And that's just not so. And anyone as old as I knows that it's not so if they just look around and think about their lives and the lives of ordinary people around them. So you start at $6 a day in a Britain that was, by 1800 standards, quite prosperous. Average income in the world was something like $2 or $3 a day in these same prices. And now British income per head is on the order of $120 a day in the same prices. In the United States, it's higher. In Switzerland, it's really shockingly high. In Hong Kong, it's almost as high as it is in the United States. In Singapore, it's a little higher. In Botswana is doing very well, and on and on and on. In 1960, of the 5 billion people on the planet, 4 billion were at an astonishingly low standard of living. They were cooking on open fires. They had no clean water. They died young. Their children especially died young. In Bangladesh in 1960, if you wanted to have 2 children surviving you, you needed to have 6 because 4 of them died. Now, of the well over 7 billion people on the planet, 1 billion live at that same level. So 4 out of 5 is against 6 out of 7. That's been the improvement even recently. And then there's this earlier history of doubling and doubling and doubling. So I call it the Great Enrichment, which I think is a much more sensible scientific label for it. Because it truly is completely unprecedented. There were these earlier efflorescences, but not like this. And the question is why? Well, there are 2 classes of explanation which in some ways connect with each other. One is the conservative explanation of the blessed Adam Smith. I always cross myself when I mention Adam Smith. I'm an Anglican, and I take this very seriously. If the Archbishop of Canterbury could declare people saints, that would be very good. And Adam Smith should be on the list early. His explanation was capital accumulation combined with his marvelous emphasis on the division of labor, on the, as we've found in COVID, the supply chains along which all of us are supplied with, say, cloth. The hundreds of, actually, this one was made rather close to the Peruvian sheep that it came from, but most of what we see around us has very long supply chains, as Adam Smith emphasized. But the motive, what drove up incomes, according to Smith, was capital accumulation. If the Highlands of Scotland were to attain what Smith regarded as the ideal society at the time in 1776, namely Holland, it would have to invest. It would have to abstain from its wild Highland ways, about which the English had something to say, and become prudent and careful and accumulate and go to school, although the Scots didn't have any trouble going to school, and then they would become rich. And we, in fact, call this Smithian growth. And it happens. If you get a full scholarship to university, it's easier for you to accumulate human capital, and you do if you pay attention at all in your classes, and you're better off. Even if you don't make more money, you're better off. You learn to read books, and you learn to think, and learn to come to the Adam Smith Institute of an evening. Yeah. So that's the Smithian, and I call it the conservative view because it's popular with conservatives, because it says that virtuous rich people are how we become better off. And I'm not completely hostile to that view. As I say, it's Smithian, and that's fine. The other popular view is, we could call it Marxist, but anyway, the progressive view, which is that our riches, the riches of people in this audience, are caused by exploiting others. Indians, both South Asians and American Indians, Central American and South American Indians, or the working class in England. That great book, 1066 and all that, one of the great books of the 20th century. The more you know English history, the funnier it is. Has its comment on the Industrial Revolution is, to understand it, you have to know that the book is about things you half remembered in history class, things you didn't quite get right, but you vaguely knew they were there. So it was called Memorable History. And the history goes like this. Around 1800, all the rich men in England realized that women and children could work 25 hours a day without most of them dying or becoming excessively deformed. This was known as the Industrial Revelation. And roughly speaking, that's the Marxist view, that exploitation of one sort or another. Now, in my own country and in yours too, the present version of that is slavery. Slavery is the cause of the riches of Europe. We can discuss that afterwards, or maybe I can discuss it a tiny bit now and say it's very implausible. A larger slave economy than the United States was Brazil. Brazil had many, many more slaves than the United States did. And yet Brazil was not the pioneer of practical industrial advance as the United States was in the 19th century. The slave trade across the Atlantic Ocean was matched in volume over a longer period of time by the East African slave trade. The West African slave trade went to the New World. The East African slave trade went up the coast to the Middle East. Yet it wasn't the Ottoman Empire that led the way to the modern world. In fact, you can make the case, this is a somewhat shocking but hard to refute assertion that an economist can make, which is that the profits of the slave trade accrued in Africa itself to the African kings who specialized in violence. Lots of people were specializing in violence in those days. Europeans certainly did. But those specialists in violence are the ones who seized the slaves in the first place. And they earned the big profits. Whereas a mere trader competing with other traders across the Atlantic would earn what traders earned for such a awful trade. And so that would be a moderate contribution to this enrichment of Europe. And indeed, the argument about the exploitation of the working class is even harder to believe than the slavery argument. Because now, wait a second. You steal from the workers, you exploit the workers because you have the Industrial Revolution. You take from them, and then you invest it Adam Smith style. And that makes everyone rich, including the people you're exploiting. This doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a deep contradiction in left-wing thought. Although, I was once a socialist myself, I understand the charm of saying that, yes, we Marxists admire what we called capitalism because the socialist state would seize the ripe fruit from the monopolized and technologically advanced capitalism. So there you are. Those are the two views. There's the investment view, and there's the exploitation view, and the exploitation view has the same economics in it as piling up capital. So why isn't piling up capital the way to become rich? Now, obviously, if you had more capital, you'd be richer. I mean, it's not that it's not that hard to understand. Well, to arrive at this enormous increase from $6 a day to $120 a day, a factor of 30 or 40, or if you properly measure improved quality of goods, better medical care, better glass. Well, this is not a very good example, but better glass. I mean, it's small. We now make doors out of glass, which you couldn't do in the 19th century, and certainly not in the 18th. Better transport and so forth. If you add that in, it's more like 10,000%. I gave a talk on this some years ago at the Department of Cultural Anthropology at Cambridge. I was somewhat depressed when a very great cultural historian stood up and said, well, I agree with you on this factor of 30 that you keep talking about. That's one of the numbers you can use. It might apply to Britain or to some other country. Factor of 30, but 3,000% is too large. Go back to your third or fourth form arithmetic and ask and notice that roughly a factor of 30 is 3,000%. So I was very kindly, I didn't say anything. I didn't get snooty about it. We deep mathematicians, we remember our fourth, more like second form arithmetic. So why doesn't capital accumulation work? Well, there are two reasons, one economic and one historical. The economic reason is that, as economists say, investment has sharply diminishing returns. Now, you own a car, perhaps. That's nice, congratulations. Now, suppose you got a second car. Well, then your husband could have a car too. And his car would be faster than yours, but still, that's all right. And you'd both have a car. And then you might get a third car, or a fourth, or a fifth. Now, you could see the tendency here. Obviously, your fifth car would be just garbage, irritating. You'd have to put it somewhere in the front garden. I don't know what you'd do with your fifth car. Stack them on top of each other. It'd be a real terrible Monty Python nightmare. So, and that's the problem with sheer, that's a very important word here, sheer capital accumulation. Just let's do what the World Bank used to say when I was a student and continued for many decades afterwards. Let's give Ghana lots of capital, and then Ghana will become rich, rich, rich. Let's not give Red China a red cent. And those people will, of course, be trapped in abysmal poverty forever. Now, as you know, that didn't happen. Ghana did not become rich, and Red China did. So capital accumulation is not causal in the way that people think it is. And it is among us. You get more capital, you're better off, but there's still diminishing returns. That's the economic problem. The historical problem is that capital accumulation is a human routine. There's a kind of assumption in a lot of thinking when people haven't thought about it too much. Thinking when you don't think is not a good idea. And it is that, well, people didn't accumulate earlier, and then there was a increase in the savings rate and a takeoff into self-sustained growth. This is Walt Whitman Rostow. And it's just not correct. Economic historians have learned and keep learning in more and more ways that people in olden days invested a great deal. Paddy agriculture in Asia is very high investment. Irrigated, terraced, going up a mountainside with terraced fields. It's very expensive to make. In the European Middle Ages, unlike rice, which is what we're talking about with paddy agriculture, wheat, barley, and oats had very low yield per unit of seed. They were, really pathetic. In Northern Europe, in the South, they're much higher. In Northern Europe, you would take a seed, you'd put it into the ground, and you'd get 4 back. Now that sounds very nice, except we're talking about broadcasting seed. Your children back in your hovel are crying in hunger, and you're taking their food and casting it on the ground. If you don't get anything next year. If every little seed, every wheat kernel you put into the ground resulted in 4, hey, that would be good. But of course it didn't, as Jesus said in the Bible, sometimes it falls on stony ground. And I think it's mustard seeds he's talking about, didn't sprout. So investment is commonplace. Capital accumulation is commonplace. It's not new. Nor, by the way, just in case this floats in your head, is profit making new. Adam Smith understood this. Max Weber understood this. Max Weber thought it was the Protestant Reformation, which is basically false, because he thought it was the doctrines of the Protestant Reformation, when actually it was the leveling of the church hierarchy that inspired people. In the extreme case is English Quakers, who don't even have a minister. There's no one in charge. If this were a Quaker meeting, I'd call for silence, and we would all be silent, and we wait for the Spirit of the Lord, the Holy Spirit, to descend. So, why did it happen, Deirdre? Stop talking about why it didn't happen, or what didn't cause it, namely exploitation or investment. What caused it? Well, I admit to a rather obvious conclusion. It was innovation, stupid. It was innovation. It was better ways of doing things. It was new products. I live in Chicago in a 13-story reinforced concrete building. Reinforced concrete was invented by a French landlord when chicken wire had just been invented. And he wanted to make big clay pots. And if you make a big clay pot without any steel or iron inside it, it just falls apart when you put water into it, or the soil, or the tree for that matter. So he found that if he put chicken wire in the clay, it held together, and you could make pots with it. And that was the beginning of reinforced concrete, which now you can build 100-story buildings with. So you take an ancient technology known to the Chinese and the Romans, and you add chicken wire, and you're home free. And again, my friend Matt Ridley talks about ideas having sex. They have sex, and the baby ideas have sex with each other, and the grandbaby ideas have sex, and we get more and more ideas. And they're technological, like reinforced concrete, biological, like antibiotics, or hybrid corn, or organizational, like the divided highway, the motorway, invented in Germany, in Hamburg, to be more exact, in the 1920s, and then famously applied under Hitler. And it's simply an organizational idea. You just decide to divide the highway and let people go one way on one side and one way on the other, and have limited access to the highway. And there are hundreds of these, millions of these ideas that a free society generates. But that's the point. It was the coming of liberal societies. Adam Smith's formulation of the obvious and simple system of natural liberty, as he expressed it, that inspired people, ordinary people, you and me, to have a go, as the Sporting English express it. Have a go, to try things out, to explosively explore the world for profitable opportunities. Now, my friend Joe Mokir says it's science, and I agree with Joe. I mean, he and I both think it's ideas that are at the core here. It's not investment, it's not exploitation, it's ideas. We agree, but he thinks it's scientific ideas, and I say, yeah, Joe, that's right. Now this camera or that fluorescent light, those wouldn't exist without science. I admit it. But that starts to be important maybe in 1900, really important after the Second World War. By then, there had been enormous increase, far above any earlier efflorescence. Is that a word? Yes, I think it is. In history. We were way into it. And to have a viable science, you need free societies. You need non-centrally planned, free speech among the scientists, or else you get the Lysenko affair, as in the Soviet Union. That can happen. It's happening now in many universities where orthodoxy of a certain sort reigns. I hope its reign is short. And universities are not automatically innovative. On the contrary, they can become, as they were largely in medieval Europe, repositories of dogma. Oxford and Cambridge in the 18th century were shameful, as Adam Smith and Gibbon both to testify. So it's not investment in universities of a sort of capital without innovation source. It's ideas. It's having a go. It's being allowed to try out things. And this is true in politics. It's true in, look, come on, it's true in jazz. It's true in painting. It's true in fashion. Any change is going to come from people being free to change things. And if you can change it, alas, it happened from the clarinet to the saxophone. I wish they hadn't. You get Charlie Parker and you get another kind of jazz. Some people think it's an advance. I'm not so sure. But you see what I mean? Suppose I end, because it's about time to end, with the following observation. Nobody thinks that central planning of jazz or music or art or your personal relations or your love life, central planning of your love life. Think of that, where the people in Whitehall, those wise people just down the street from here, would decide who was an appropriate partner for you and you and you. This is obvious madness. No one except Xi Jinping would think this is a good vision of society. Yet, it's said that in economic matters, well, this isn't so. I think it's partly because a lot of intellectuals think that business is easy. They think that the best way to decide whether someone's smart or not is whether they're good at Latin. They're good at Latin, and that must mean they're very smart and they should get a fellowship at All Souls. But practical people, as the great A. Hausman, a classicist and poet, said, practical people know that there are things to know in being a baker and a butcher. There's a great essay that Hausman gave to the Classics Association in Britain, called, in 1924, called The Function of Thought in Textual Criticism, where he recommended that instead of following little formulae, you should think in deciding what the correct text of Catullus was. Remarkable idea. You should actually think. And thinking is difficult in business. If it was easy, we would all be rich, wouldn't we? If we were so smart. You know, the very idea of policy, which I'm going to complain about tomorrow at the LSE, in a speech called The Impossibility of Policy, assumes that we can predict the future and therefore steer the economy. And if you think, if you're an economist or a politician, and you think you can steer the economy, why aren't you rich? If I knew the future of interest rates, there are hedged bets I could make. I'd take out a second mortgage or a third mortgage on my house. So There's a deep problem with what Adam Smith called the man of system. The man of system has become more and more prominent, and it's the Adam Smith Institute that stands against the man of system. And for you all, for people, for folk, a fair field full of folk, those are the people who made us rich. I have a book that was mentioned with Art Carden, which is a kind of summary of 3 scholarly books I wrote. And this book is called Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. And that's what happened in the last 2 centuries. So it's a very bad idea not to leave people alone. And the ghost of Adam Smith claps. Thank you.
It's okay with you, Deirdre. I'd like to do a short Q&A up here.
Certainly, let's do it.
And please, questions, if we could keep them brief, and questions, please. That would be very much appreciated. 15 minutes.
That'd be good.
Yeah.
So have at me, or unstinted praise would be nice too.
Another round of applause, please.
Now, I'd like to ask you, I mean, I agree with just what you're saying, but how do you stop people going too far?
In what
I'm
respect?
thinking of, well, I mean, I'm thinking of something like, say, the atom bomb. I mean, this is actually getting on with something and investigating, but how this is the uncertainty in outcome, and there's so many things which have been going quite well, and then people think, oh, and so the problem is, how do you stop human beings exploring but not getting somewhere?
You can't. Look, my theory of the business cycle is not that it's about banking or anything, although that's entailed in it. It's one of the transmission mechanisms. But in the age of innovism, that's my word for capitalism, a much more sensible word, I think, innovism. There are waves of optimism about innovation. You invent the railways and you think, oh boy, this is great. Let's have more of those. And you do too many. A sharp and rather simple example is the dot-com boom around 2000. The boom and then the fall. The housing boom and fall in 2008 was more serious. But still, I think booms and busts are mainly caused by innovation. And the implication of that is that you can't do anything about them. Because booms and busts of optimism and pessimism are caused by innovation. And innovation, as I said at the end of my talk, is unpredictable. If I was so smart to know the future of mathematics or the future of engineering or future of this, that, of all kinds, of the future of skirt lengths, I could become rich. So I think we have to live with uncertainty. We have to act as grown-ups and prepare for it and be careful, but still let innovation take place.
Next question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you could give your name before.
Okay, my name's Sheldon Wilkie. First, a quick comment, and that is, I agree with you that in a free society, ideas, from my own experience, you create ideas and you create new products.
You bet.
My question now is, you mentioned the word slavery.
Yeah, I did.
What I would suggest to you is that in places like Bristol, in Liverpool, those cities became wealthy because of trade in slavery. I mean,
also Glasgow.
Yeah, Glasgow. But I mean, I reference David Orris, the historian, and he's done a television series, and he sort of said that Bristol got wealthy.
That's right.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I just saw David a few days ago. He's a friendly acquaintance of mine, and I think if he were here, he would agree. That's right. Bristol and Liverpool and Glasgow waxed rich on the slave trade, also on tobacco, and then eventually cotton. But that's not Britain. That's part of Britain. So parts of, look, let's take the case of imperialism. There's an easy one. Was British imperialism profitable for the average Brit? And the answer is no. And I could go through the details of it, but the basic point is that the average Brit was paying for the Navy. And the Navy was the main defense of the empire. And it was very expensive. And the average Brit lost his life on the Northwest frontier or the trenches of the First World War or in Northern Africa in the Second World War. His gain or her gain was that she was proud of being a member, the cosmopolis. So but obviously some people got rich from the empire. Clive got rich, stole from the Indians in the middle of the 18th century. Twits from minor public schools went out to the empire and waxed rich. But that doesn't make it the cause of Britain's wealth.
We'll take one from close to the back now.
Yeah. 60,000 people in Africa are dying of starvation every single day. The other half population of Africa are deprived of basic necessities of life.
Yeah, true enough.
European countries are exploiting the resources of South Africa and all the African continent.
No.
EU, US, Britain, and everything is involved in the exploitation of the African people.
No.
Now, this is a disequilibrium, economic disequilibrium.
No.
What are you going to do about it?
Well, I think I think the premise is false. I think the premise is false. It's certainly true that people die of starvation in appalling numbers and have malaria and terrible diseases, sleeping sickness and so forth. And that's going down like a stone. In the year 2000, the Millennium Goals, one of them, was to greatly increase the access to fresh water of poor people in the world. And it's women who bear the burden of carrying the water. And they have to walk 3 miles one way, 3 miles back with a thing on their head, and they end up with arthritis in their neck. All right. That goal, which they expected to be achieved in, 2020, was achieved in 2010. The number and percentage of very poor people is falling, and the reason it's falling is that their people are able to have a go. Market women in Africa are a terribly important part, a very important part of the advance of African countries. So I don't think being indignant, express it this way, sadness about the evils in the world is not a substitute for analysis and facts.
I don't have eyes in the back of my head, but I'm conscious of their hand behind me.
Yeah, I'm interested in the distinction between the Industrial Revolution and the Industrious Revolution. Do our values make us industrious? In which case, why is the world becoming industrious?
No, that my dear friend Jan de Vries made a very good argument for a so-called, what he called very cleverly, an industrious revolution, rather like this spoof in 1066 and all that, except that he got the evidence for it. That is, there was an increase in the intensity of work in the late 17th century and the 18th century. But it's chicken feed compared with 3,000%. You work a little harder, you get 10%, 20%, 50% more income. That's only 50%, not 3,000. So you see, it's a version of Max Weber. Max Weber said this essentially, that Calvinism made people work harder. Everyone in this room believes that because they've been told it at school. That what happened is that individual business people got more profit-oriented and worked harder and saved more. It's all wrong. Oddly, Max Weber, the great founder of sociology, one of the great founders, had a psychological theory of how we got rich. Namely, we worked harder. We were afraid, these business people, were afraid they were not among the chosen, the elect. And so they worked harder. Well, yeah. What actually, I and some other people, but especially myself, have a sociological theory, which you'd think Marx would do. And he took Benjamin Franklin as an example of this. I was just in Benjamin Franklin's house just down the street here that he rented, not the house, the rooms he rented. And Benjamin Franklin wasn't a Franklinite. He wasn't a saver, and he worked hard, but who doesn't? So this whole idea that the Industrious Revolution is how it happened is just unpersuasive scientifically.
I think we'll take two more questions before we retire downstairs, some more drinks and discussion. I'll take gentleman at the front and gentleman on the left. So
you've mentioned the bourgeois virtues.
Yeah, I have indeed. The bourgeois virtues.
Where are they coming from? Have they ever come from the universities?
No, I should think not. Rather not, I'd have to say. No, look, I wrote a book called The Bourgeois Virtues in 2006, and it became the first of what eventually became a trilogy. I don't ever set out to write trilogies. It's like Gibbon. Scribble, 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 Mr. Gibbon, one stout, thick book after another. And that's me. But it was called The Bourgeois Virtues, but the point of the book was to show that the virtues that we all admire, that every society, Chinese, South African, Asian, Latin American, whatever, admire, things like courage and love and hope and temperance and so forth, those all are functioning in a commercial society. And that it's not the case that commerce is necessarily corrupting. Now look, Donald Trump is a thoroughly corrupt man. He's living in a hell right now. It's called The Body and Mind of Donald Trump. That's hell. Think of Kafka's great story of a man who wakes up and finds he's a giant insect. Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding yourself to be Donald Trump. The horror of it. That's the corrupt part. But commerce, as many people who are in this room who are in it know perfectly well, can also be sweetening. Montesquieu spoke of sweet commerce, du commerce. The first publication of Adam Smith was an encomium for a Glasgow man of business who died. It's a short paragraph. And it describes the good, virtuous man of business. And these people exist by the billions. Let's allow them to do their work.
And then finally,
I think you talked about two kinds of capitalism. The first is about distributing inventions around the world, like iron coating, using metal rails, and
Yep.
stuff like that. And that's the kind where kind of billion people are brought up out of poverty. But the other kind you talked about at the end is about having new ideas. And I'm worried that that's not continuing in the same way
Oh, yeah.
as it used to.
That's a worry.
I know you talked about universities, there were dogmas and so on. But I don't think that fully explains why it's not carrying on. The West has been getting richer in the same way it was in the 50s and 60s. And why you think that might be?
Well, there are a couple of points to be made in the economic history of this. The boom of the 50s and 60s was a rebound from 20 years catastrophic to economic growth. Actually, economic policy in the United States was worse in the 30s than it was in Britain. So although Britain had a bad 20s, it had, compared to the United States, a good 30s. But then it had a longer war, you may have noticed. And you can, there's a lot of foolish talk about war being good for prosperity. And it's not. Turns out that taking half of national income and throwing it at Germans and Japanese is not a good business plan. That's one point. So the unusual growth after the war, which I was the beneficiary, and so were many of the people in this room, it was simply a rebound. It's not true that economic growth has stopped even in the rich countries. Now you'll hear it daily in the newspaper and on the TV. And you'll hear it from the left and the right, especially from the left. And it's just not true. Things are better than they were. There was a survey just taken a couple of days ago that I was told about, where a third of the British people, at least by the sample, said that things are worse than they were when the Queen ascended the throne. Now this is pazzo. I mean, even the cricket is better. But there's some doubt on that point. I admit it. But come on, it's just silly. Yet a third of the population believes it, and that comes out of a nostalgia that is dangerous. A conservative nostalgia comes out of a progressive belief that what they call capitalism cannot possibly be a good idea. Yet it was a good idea. It was a very, very good idea. The ordinary poor people are getting better off as we speak. Now you can screw it up. You can have rent control. You can have crazy level housing planning, what's it called in Britain? Planning permission. And I think you do. I think you're all of you people who run the country, you're nuts to have the level of planning permission that's required in this country to do anything. You build a shed in the backyard and give some nutcase at the council who's an architect and wants you to build it this way or that. So you can make people poorer. And many governments, the Italian government, for example, are good at that. But on the whole, and then the great point is that the poorest people in the world who are not in London are getting richer. First, it was the Chinese after 1978. You speak of the Chinese model. There's no Chinese model. They adopted the liberal model. My friend Steve Chung, a professor in Hong Kong, was one of the people who persuaded the Chinese Communist Party. And they literally read Adam Smith. I'm not making this up. They did it. These party grandees read Adam Smith and said, "Oh no, that's a good idea." And so the Chinese model is the Western model. The central planning model was what made them poor, what kept them poor. So I'm optimistic. I think that the world is getting better, especially for the very poorest, and that we'd better stick with what he called, let's see if I can bring the other quotation to mind, what Smith called he called it the liberal plan of liberty, justice, and what's the third one, Eamon? Liberty, peace. No, that's another argument. That's another argument, and I'm not so sure he's correct about that. But anyway, it's all there in Adam Smith here. Let's stop debating about this. Go read The Wealth of Nations and The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. To end on a note of somewhere there's been very much progress very recently, it's in the field of whiskey, specifically in the Adam Smith Institute's very own whiskey blend, The Spirit of the Invisible Hand, which has on the label, "You will be led to promote an end that was no part of your own." And on the back, it's not recommended for socialist, statist, bureaucrats, or mercantilists. So thank you very much, Deirdre.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll cherish this.
Retire downstairs for some more discussion drinks.